Hey everyone, welcome back. If you watched the first video, if not, welcome for the first time, I guess. I'm Sage. This is part 2 in my little series of questions you're too afraid to ask in OMM. Today I got this question, which is, when doing simple myofascial stretches on my partner, I feel like I'm doing it correctly, but then I ask her if it feels okay, and she doesn't even feel the stretch. Does that mean I'm doing it wrong, or does that mean she just doesn't have any hypertonicity and wouldn't feel it anyway? I don't know if maybe I'm not going deep enough into the tissue, but when I push deeper, I end up just pushing down on her and not actually stretching the muscle at all. So since these questions are anonymous, it's hard to provide like individual feedback to this person because I've never seen them performing these techniques. But I do have like a few thoughts that I can go through that I think are just general things that a lot of people struggle with. First thing I want to say is you're definitely not alone. Like, there have been times when I'm doing a stretch, I know the steps, it feels second nature. I'm like, man, I'm balling out on this stretch, my partner's having a great time, and I'm like, hey, how does it feel? And she's literally like, oh, I didn't even know you started yet. And I'm like, sick deal, thanks. That definitely wounded my pride. But it's fine, we've all been there, and it's really important just to remember that like everybody's body is different. You know, some people need really hard pressure in order to just even like begin to feel something, versus someone else, you feel like you just like touch them very lightly and they're like, ooh, that's a little too much. Can you go a little lighter? And that's okay. It's really important to like understand those boundaries, to check in frequently. So I was really glad to hear that this person was checking in with their partner. That's the only way you're gonna know if you're being effective. So the first thing I want to say about OMM is, or about this question in particular, is that almost everybody has hypertonicity somewhere. So this person wasn't clear if their person had hypertonicity at all. The best way to find that out is to assess ahead of time. It's pretty easy to palpate. If you can't figure out how to find a hypertonic muscle, you can watch my previous video. I did like a little 6-minute video on that. Do that ahead of time and then stretch the hypertonic side. That will be the best way to make sure that you're doing something that's going to have some sort of effect. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, make sure that you're engaging the muscle and not something else before you even start the stretch. So one good way to like think about this is, if you touch the back of your hand and you like do small circles or you do back and forth, like see how the skin and the subcutaneous tissue, they're really kind of like slippery almost. They move around really freely. Versus when you do this, I like to do examples on this thenar eminence because I feel like that's a really easy muscle to palpate. This is what muscle feels like usually. Or if you want to touch your finger pads together, you know, different muscles have different like tone naturally. So it might feel more like this, it might feel more like this. And again, you can watch these things in my previous video, but if you feel like this is what you feel and then you're able to do like a big stretch like that, you're probably not engaging the muscle, and so that's not going to feel like anything to your partner. So you want to make sure when you're doing, let's say like a perpendicular stretch or a parallel stretch to a muscle, you want to press down past the skin, past the subcutaneous tissue, and make sure that you're engaging that muscle, because everything in OMM is about being targeted, about being really precise in your motions so that a small motion actually produces a fairly large result. So make sure you're really engaging the muscle, and that way when you do the stretch, and it might not be a huge motion like I said before, you're actually targeting the area that needs to be treated. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, we have this big tendency in med school to be like very robotic, you know, like, okay, this stretch is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. I'm going to do them in that exact order. I got to make sure I do all of them. Like, and somewhere in all of that reasoning, you end up losing like the end goal and what you're actually trying to do. So when OMM was developed by A.T. Still, actually, he didn't like develop specific treatments and then teach those to his students. He said like, okay, these are the principles, these are the dysfunctions, and these are the normals. So what you want to do is find a way to get that dysfunctioning muscle or dysfunctioning bone or whatever it is back to the normal. So what you'll find because of this is there's actually a ton of variability in OMM. Like each practitioner, each professor, you know, each student even will do everything a different way, but the idea is just to get to the same outcome. So I feel like if you focus on the principles, focus on the outcome you want, then the steps should come more naturally. And actually, like throughout that process, you might find that you end up doing the stretch better, because maybe before, in being caught up in these like very specific steps, you actually just weren't getting to the outcome because you were too in your head and not enough like in your hands, in your principles. Does that make sense? You know, when you're doing these stretches, especially the first year stretches, it's really important to think about the direction that the muscle fibers are running. And then if you're trying to do a parallel stretch or a perpendicular stretch, I find that a lot of first years will not go in at the right angle to the muscle, and that can make all the difference as well when you're doing those stretches. So the last thing I want to say, which sort of ties into my last point, is that I felt really good that this person said they were even checking in with their partner in the first place. I am always surprised by how many students like have never checked in with their OMM partner and actually have no clue if their partner feels better at the end of lab or feels anything at all. Don't forget that interpersonal skills and the humanistic domain are super, super important in being an osteopathic student. Just to like give you guys an idea, I have my partner here today. I'm sorry, he is a little bit creepy, but we love him anyway. He is who he is. So one thing is like when you're doing the stretch, so let's say I'm stretching his traps up here and I'm stretching and I say, hey, how does that feel? And he might say, I don't really feel anything at all. So what I'm gonna do is reset, clear my mind, clear my technique. I'm gonna make sure I engage the muscle, but maybe engage it with a little bit more pressure, and then apply the stretch and say, okay, how does that feel now? And then hopefully he says, okay, that feels better. He might say, actually, that's too much. It hurts a little bit. In which case, I would go back, adjust my pressure, and, you know, perform the stretch accordingly. But it's always important to check in, like, you know, maybe you're holding the stretch and you're like, how is that? And they say, actually, you know, I can feel your fingernails digging into me a little bit. So then you know, reposition, adjust, do it again. Some people might prefer more of like a kneading motion versus some people might respond better to a static stretch. You know, it's always important just to like check in with them and find out how they're doing, because that's a reflection of how you're doing. And don't forget, like I said earlier, every person's body is different, so everybody's going to have different needs and different wants in order to get to the outcome, which I also said before is the more important sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, than how exactly you get there. Again, OMM is sort of like an art form. There's tons of variability, but if you can be really grounded in the principles and really understanding like what your outcome is and what the physiology is or the anatomy is to get there, then that's gonna be the best way to do really well in this course. Anyway, thanks for watching if you made it this long. Sorry this video is a little bit longer, but I hope it helped. I hope whoever asked me this question ends up seeing it. And I hope you guys please submit more questions, because I'm really enjoying doing these. Even if none of you end up watching them, I'm actually just having a fun time. Bye.